Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. Today is Wednesday, the 24th of February, 2021. And in this program tonight, we'll be discussing the growing threat that China poses to the West. So we have an action-packed program in front of you tonight. Regan, now, the issue of China is something I didn't know much about. So, the Lord has been very gracious and has almost given me an intelligence briefing on this subject. And I didn't know until I started researching for this program the extent that China poses, not only to the United States, but also for the world and their global ambitions. And I think this is such an important program because we need to wake up to the growing threat of China that's coming from the East. And China will be the biggest threat to our freedom, to our democracy, to our liberties that we've seen since the Second World War.
Well, and such has been said by leading political figures in the West, particularly in the United States. China has immense economic power. If you consider what's gone on since COVID-19, we've seen borderline economic collapse in some situations. We've certainly seen a fall in our economy here in the UK, the US as well. To some degree, things have not gone particularly well or as would have been projected in, say, January 2020. And yet China, where all of this stemmed from, in Wuhan, has seen its economy increase and life has very much returned to normal. We remain in lockdown after lockdown. China is very back to normal. You saw scenes of parties and concerts happening around New Year's in Wuhan itself. So, you know, there's a lot of economic strength that's relocating and is shifting from the West there. And I would say, yes, we can look and actually highlight that China is a growing threat to the West, but only because we've made it so, because we've allowed it to be so. For years, we've been shipping off our own homegrown companies, trading off, our companies that we have and our workers for cheaper labor that, if we're honest, is often in sweatshops or in essentially enslaved-like situations, and have basically, well, we will be facing a cost for it. Military power is immense. They have the third most amount of nuclear weapons in the world. I believe it's the third. WMDs, legitimately, I mean, there's 350-ish, I believe, ships that they have that are activated and ready to go. They're one of the most powerful naval forces in the world. They have 2,183,000 active military personnel in the Army. I mean, it's incredible. So yes, we would be naive to look at China and think that there is no particular threat that they pose. And that's not even considering really what makes them a threat, and that's the evil ideology
of the Communist Party.
Of the Communist Party, of the People's Republic of China.
No, absolutely. And I remember in the 90s that it was the Clinton administration invested so much economic capital into China together with Britain and other European nations because they were getting rich. And now in the 21st century, we're seeing that China is merging as an emerging superpower ready to take on the Americans. And the Chinese already said that the 21st century will be their century. But we know that the new president in the White House, Joe Biden, unlike his predecessor, President Trump, has said that he is actually cultivating the communist regime in China. His son, Hunter, has a very strong business ties with the regime. And this is what he says about China. He said that the Chinese communists are not bad folks. Now, if that doesn't concern you, I don't know what else is we'll unpack the program. Now, also with this one, China is now being labeled as the world's worst executioner, as the regime kills thousands of people every year using firing squads, lethal injections, and mobile death squads. And, you know, before this program, and it was like the Lord gave me this intelligence briefing, which was an article written by John Ratcliffe. Now, he was President Trump's US Director for National Intelligence, and he wrote this extremely compelling article back in December in the Wall Street Journal entitled China is a National Security Threat #1. So just to remind you, we are live, we are interactive tonight. This program is not a program without your contribution. So please feel free to email or text into the program. And the big question is, how much of a threat does China pose? So I'd love to hear from you.
Anita is hot off the press here. Evening, Simon and Regan. It's always a pleasure to see you both. You do such a wonderful job of bringing us the truth concerning some very important issues. I, for one, am concerned about the threat from China. Whilst President Trump sought to separate China from having too much influence on the US economy, Biden's son's close connection to them don't bode well, exactly what you were just indicating. China almost certainly started this pandemic and are seeking to control the world economies. I don't think people even realize the threats posed by seemingly benign phone apps such as TikTok, another item that we're going to be discussing.
Discuss that later today.
President Trump was right to ban it, as they're using these to gather data on us all. We do have every reason for concern. I studied the rise of communism in China too. It has brought some of the most atrocious human rights violations the world has seen. Oh, but Anita, they're not really bad folks. I mean, apart from the mobile death squads, they're not bad folks.
And the oppression of Christians and putting people in concentration camps and trying to subvert the world. But, you know, if Biden thinks they're nice people and they're not bad folks.
Sex-selective abortions, you know, the higher rate of men in China because of it, yeah, not bad folks. We have another, Veronica says, might I know why China is not being held accountable for destroying people's lives with this COVID-19 as it stemmed from their country? What is really going on? And Veronica, I think that's a question that we all would have asked perhaps, or would like to ask. We would like to know the answer to it, certainly, but China's not been held to account. Now, there's been an investigation, I believe, by the World Health Organization.
That's a whitewash.
Right. You know, the World Health Organization, allegedly, you know, they send people to investigate and carry out some sort of thorough investigation of these labs, which, from where there had been warnings by intelligence agencies, both in the US and I believe the UK as well, that warned viruses that were being created, the potential for, you know, biological warfare even comes up in it. And when you look at how China has fared in the past year after locking down Wuhan for much less a time than we have now accumulated in the past year, it's gone back to normal. And here we are still.
That we know of.
Well, that we know
don't forget,
of.
You know,
Yeah, that's
probably
true.
dealing with a lot of state propaganda as well.
True.
But going back to what John Ratcliffe said, who was Trump's former US Director of National Security, he says that the People's Republic of China poses the greatest threat to America today and the greatest threat to democracy and freedom worldwide since the Second World War. He says that resisting Beijing's attempt to reshape and dominate the world is the challenge to our generation. He said the intelligence is clear. Beijing intends to dominate the US and the rest of the planet economically, militarily, and also technologically. He says many of China's major public initiatives and prominent companies only offer a layer of camouflage to the activities of the Chinese Communist Party, and that China's approach to economic espionage is rob, replicate, and replace. And I'll just read you this one. It says, in 2018, the US federal jury found the Chinese company Sinovel was guilty of stealing trade secrets from the American company Superconductor, who actually makes wind turbines. The court imposed penalties on China, but the damage was done in terms of the US company lost $1 billion in its value, and at the cost of 700 jobs because China stole those secrets. I'll just read one more. It says the FBI frequently arrests Chinese nationals for stealing research and development secrets. The head of Harvard's University Chemistry Department was arrested in early 2020 as China was paying him $50,000 a month as part of a plan to attract top scientists and reward them for stealing information. And the US government estimates that China intellectual property thefts cost America as much as $500 billion a year. So that's around $4,000 to $6,000 for every US household. And the theft from China is just unbelievable. And this is how they're making their money, their wealth, and their power.
And this is also fueling their plans for domination around the world. And that is what this is. You can go back only, just a little bit over a century ago, and you see this plan for global domination. There were major powers at the time. You have the Count in Germany looking for that same sort of domination. You had the Tsar, and then after the Tsar, it was replaced by the followers of Marxism, the Bolsheviks, and so that's where we see the Soviet Union rise up. The same thing, they want it's communism. It happened in Russia, it happened in Germany. The UK and the US were also part of this sort of resistance against this plot for domination. Japan had it. China now is a leading, they're a leader alongside North Korea, though China has a lot more legitimate power than North Korea. One of the reasons, though, that I think we need to consider when we think of why is it that North Korea is not dealt with. North Korea has close ties to China. If the US and perhaps an alliance between the US and the UK was to get involved in North Korea and try to clamp down on the human rights abuses, or let's say actually just send a few Black Hawks in with some squads to overthrow the dictator who's there, you would be risking not any legitimate problem from the North Korean army that could be dealt with. The big issue is 2,183,000 active Chinese military personnel who would likely involve themselves. Not only could they then take over North Korea, they could also and would likely try to usurp control over South Korea. So this is all very political. It can be very, very complex, but it shows that for years and years we've been enabling China. We've been giving them more power. We've been sending more business that way. We've been sending off our companies that way as well. We've had corrupt scientists like the chap you mentioned at Harvard being paid $50,000 a month to give secrets. Who knows how many others around the United States, around perhaps even the United Kingdom, are involved in that, have been bought by the Chinese government. Also, who can forget that last year it was in the news, all of this about 5G, and one of the big concerns, and something that did, I think, lead to some of the conspiracy theories and stuff that are out there related to 5G, was the legitimate concern that the company Hui is actually, essentially, in the words of a friend of mine, borderline spy device.
Absolutely.
If you have one of the 5G boxes and it's Hui, well,
which is a Chinese company, and wanting to offer the British government the opportunity to map out its 5G telecommunications network. And the Chinese company was supposed to do that with pressure from the United States government, said that we won't share intel with you if you make this deal with China, which has stopped our government from doing so. So let's have a look at a couple of news reports looking at the threat posed by China and is a possible war coming. And this was an excellent report produced by Dale Hurd of CBN.
This is video from the Chinese military showing a simulated attack on America's Air Force Base on the island of Guam. Meanwhile, during a simulated attack on a Pacific island this week, U.S. military personnel wore this patch on their uniforms, showing a drone over China. The war drums in the Pacific are building. With the U.S. standing up to Chinese expansionism in the South China Sea and fighting back against China's attack on the American economy and its security, it's raised fears the two nations could be headed for a military showdown. Some say China has sought to dominate an economically weak post-COVID-19 world through increasingly aggressive behavior. 20 Indian soldiers were killed this summer in a surprise cross-border attack by the Chinese army. China has clashed with its neighbors in the South China Sea by claiming most of it for itself, and there are fears of war between China and Taiwan. China has been looting the U.S. of intellectual property and military secrets on a colossal scale. FBI Director Christopher Wray says his bureau is opening a new Chinese espionage case every 10 hours.
The greatest external threat that the United States faces over the medium and long term is the threat by the regime in China today, the Chinese Communist Party, led by General Secretary Xi Jinping.
And Secretary of State Pompeo says China is set on world domination, but he says the Trump administration is determined to stop it. Dale Hurd, CBN News. After only 2 years as a worldwide app, TikTok has become a major part of internet culture and social media.
It is an extremely addictive platform.
It's an app that allows users to create and share 15-second videos on any topic. With over 2 billion all-time downloads, it's the most downloaded app in the world. TikTok was downloaded 315 million times during the first 3 months of this year. That's more downloads in 1 quarter than any other app in history. It looks innocent enough, but looks can be deceiving, and President Trump has extended a deadline until November 12th for TikTok's U.S. operation to be sold to a U.S. company or be banned.
At which point it's going to be out of business in the United States. But if somebody, and whether it's Microsoft or somebody else, buys it, that'll be interesting.
TikTok presents several risks. It's owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company so closely tied to the Chinese government that it created a company committee of Communist Party members. Software experts say TikTok steals more data than any other social media app and is specifically designed to hide just how much data it's stealing. Ashkan Kazarian, Director of Civil Liberties at Tech Freedom, says TikTok has consistently concealed its connections to the Chinese Communist government.
They refused to testify in Senate, saying that their executives are based in Beijing. At the same time, they said they're not a Chinese company. Then their lawyers told New York Times that they're not a Chinese company because they're incorporated in the Cayman Islands. Things like that kept happening over and over again.
A major concern is that more than a third of TikTok's 50 million daily users are 14 years of age or younger. And Lena Nealon of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation says experts have branded TikTok a hunting ground for pedophiles.
And that was due to insufficient controls that allowed strangers to view minors' videos, comment on videos, and directly message them.
Nathaniel Bradley, CEO and founder of Data Donate Technologies, says the best thing parents can do for their kids' safety is remove TikTok from their phones.
These applications have become a Trojan horse. It is just a situation where, as a parent, I would recommend deleting it.
Experts say TikTok was designed primarily as a data stealing app, meant to look like a social media app. And it's given the Chinese Communist Party access to the personal data of millions of Americans. Microsoft and Oracle have been mentioned as wanting to buy TikTok, which is valued globally at $50 billion. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Just to let you know that report by Dale Hurd from CBN then was actually published, I think, around the autumn time. And of course, we know that President Trump is no longer in office and that we have Joe Biden. So I don't know the current situation regarding TikTok in the States, but certainly it's a warning to us all, and certainly concerning our privacy and data data breach by the Chinese government.
We have some emails here. I've heard from a Christian friend of mine that the Chinese kill children with disabilities. It's an evil regime. It will stop at nothing to dominate. They need to be stopped. That's from Mark. I've heard very similar, Mark, and as indicated earlier, they specifically, well, one of the leading nations in regard to sex-selective abortions, aborting girls generally over boys. A lot of it due to the former one-child policy. They now have upgraded. I think you're now allowed to have 2 children. But imagine being in a country where you're told you can only have 1 child. And if you have another child, you have to abort, or you have to pay a serious fine, you get in trouble. Imagine being in that sort of environment. That's China for you. Here we have Tim. From what I can tell, it serves the world elite to position China against America, as the end results of capitalism and communism are identical to controlling elite. Don't really care who appear to win because they will win. The current pandemic serves the purpose of the world elite and World Economic Forum. It almost doesn't matter where or how the virus started. This is being used as a tool to subjugate and control the world's population. Satinder says, good evening to you both. China is causing problems to many of its neighbors in the South China Sea at the moment. It's been facing off against Japan, South Korea, Australia, and especially Taiwan. China has also been causing problems with its immediate neighbor, India, both of which are nuclear powers. Could all of this saber rattling just be a distraction from the investigation into the origins of the coronavirus? The U.S. Navy presence is increasing too, with 2 aircraft carriers currently present. The situation with Taiwan will be a real test of President Biden's resolve. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Satinder.
That's a very intelligent email.
Yeah.
Also, just to let you know, according to this article by John Ratcliffe, a reminder again, he was the head of US intelligence under President Trump, said that the Communist Party also seeks to influence members of Congress from the Senate. They do this in a very kind of subtle way. So, for example, a senator or a congressman or woman, either in his state or his constituency, has a Chinese firm that employs thousands of Americans. And if he's actually engaged in designing legislation that will affect Chinese interests, or speaking up about the horrendous human rights abuses in China, or talking about the persecution of the underground church in China, then what happens then is a trade unionist from this company will approach the senator or the congressman or woman and essentially say to them that if you don't stop raising the issue of China and what China's doing in a negative way, then we will move this plant and thousands of jobs will go in your state or your town or your city that could pose an electoral threat to you. And this is what China's doing. He also said that China should be America's primary national security threat going forward, and that Chinese leaders seek to subordinate the rights of the individuals to the will of the Communist Party, extract and exert government control over companies, subvert the privacy and freedom of their citizens with an authoritarian surveillance state. Now, earlier today, I interviewed Dale Hurd from CBN, who's one of their senior correspondents. So let's have a look now at an interview I did with Dale Hurd. We're now joined on Behind the Headlines by Dale Hurd, who is a senior correspondent with CBN. I'm sure many of you have seen his excellent reports. Dale, warm welcome to Behind the Headlines.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And I really appreciate, and so do our viewers, the excellent news reports that you put together for CBN. Can you share with us some of the amazing range of topics that you cover in your news reports?
Well, I did the Great Reset, which was amazing, by the way, because I've never seen such an amazing conspiracy completely out in the open. My next story is on radicalism in corporations, which harkens back to fascist Italy, and that Mussolini thrived on co-opting the corporations. So usually culture war stuff, but I have been focusing on China because it's something that it feels like the world is still asleep about.
No, absolutely. I've read an extraordinary article today in the Wall Street Journal by President Trump's national intelligence advisor, John Ratcliffe, who said that China poses the #1 threat to the United States. Can you elaborate more on what he meant by saying that China is America's #1 threat?
Well, in terms of on a whole range of issues, the intellectual property theft is the greatest in history, as far as we can determine. Their theft of our patents and our ideas. The data mining through apps like TikTok, which, by the way, no one should have on their phone. You should not allow, you find some other way to make your teenager happy, but get TikTok off their phone. TikTok, for instance, is a data mining app posing as a social media app. They're data mining the whole world, but in terms of the US, we've determined that they have data of almost every American. They have something on just about every American. They have the health information of many Americans. And I was happy to see that Great Britain is doing something about Huawei 5G, because that would have been a nightmare for your country, because Huawei hardware has backdoors to the Chinese military, and I'm sure many of you know about this, and that was bad news. So I was glad to see Britain do that.
Absolutely, and I think that's down to pressure of President Trump. And talking about President Trump, he really did stand up to this threat posed to the West and China's desire for global domination. Can you just share with our viewers some things he did to stand up against this Chinese regime?
Basically, he wasn't going to roll over and let them take advantage of the United States. You know, he has been criticized even by people that don't like China for being a little bit unilateral and just kind of acting. But in a sense, that's what we needed, because there has been this kind of whistling past the graveyard. I don't know if that's a saying in Britain, but this sense that, well, somehow everything with China will be all right. George Bush's approach was disastrous. He viewed China as a strategic partner, and China was stealing from the United States military secrets, trade secrets, jobs. It's basically been plundering the world. And I guarantee you, any nation that doesn't realize that China is plundering is being plundered right now. That's China's mining the world.
Very scary prospect. Just been reading a report about how China is trying to build effectively a new soldier and genetically enhanced soldier to create a super soldier to enhance their military capabilities and to be the most powerful global military on the planet. I know that you've done a recent report on this. Can you share with us some of your findings into what sounds like it's sci-fi or Hollywood, the fact that they want to build these genetically modified soldiers?
Yeah, the conclusion I reached is, sounds like science fiction, that they are trying to breed a master race, which sounds ludicrous, but that's what it is. It's eugenics. There is no bottom to their ethics. They have no ethical concerns. They're trying to breed different animals together. They're trying to breed animals with human intelligence. They want to breed a super soldier that is stronger, doesn't need to eat or drink as much, and then put computer parts in his body. You know, our country is working on that as well, but you know, Western countries have some ethical considerations. China has none, and so this is a scary prospect going forward. Yeah, China's bent on world domination. Okay, period. And if as long as the world pretends that it's not, it's going to move forward toward its goal.
And can you also share with us the fact that we have a new administration in the White House with Joe Biden, and there's talks about the Biden administration reviewing the embargo that's placed on Huawei to roll out the 5G internet infrastructure for the United States. And President Trump obviously put that to the back burner, fearing that the Chinese government would use the intelligence and use 5G in order to gather intelligence for their own for the Communist Party of China. But can you share with us how much this new Biden administration is in bed with the Chinese, and how compromised are they?
Very compromised. China Joe, which the conservatives in our country call this man, who is in the White House. It sounds like just, an exaggeration, but China has the goods on the Bidens. So this is a foreign policy disaster for the United States. So far, our military has continued to conduct what are called freedom of navigation exercises through the South China Sea. And what that is we're going through international waters that China claims for its own. And we're saying, we don't agree with these arbitrary boundaries that you've redrawn in the South China Sea. But I think those were already scheduled. These military exercises are planned months in advance. And I don't know going forward, because Obama didn't do any freedom of navigation exercises as far as I know. And and Biden's recent comments on the Uyghurs were horrifying to CNN, that it was some kind of cultural thing. Okay, what China is doing to the Uyghurs is sterilizing women, forced abortions, deprogramming camps, and so forth. The Nazis have the unique mantle of the Holocaust over them, and that's unmatchable. But in a lot of ways, China has surpassed the Nazis in eugenics, in the extermination of non-Mandarin peoples. And I want to add, you didn't ask me about this, but it's a racist culture. Okay, the treatment of Africans in China is terrible. Okay, so it's just it's a country that needs the Lord, and I pray about that often. For the Chinese church, the church is going forward. And I will say this: the government acts very paranoid. I think that something's happening in China. The government has doubled down on the church persecution, and it's doubled down on Falun Gong, which is sort of a Buddhist style sect, but is basically harmless. And they treat them like a resistance movement, which shows you that something's going on in China and the government feels paranoid.
And Dale, we know that the Chinese use surveillance, and they use the latest technology in order to oppress its own people, and certainly to oppress the underground church. The fact is that China have something in the region of 500 million cameras everywhere, so they can monitor everything. Can you share with us this, what is called, is it a social credit system that they have in China, and how some Democrats in the United States are wanting to adopt this as policy, in which you are rewarded with your social media if you support a particular agenda or you support the Communist Party of China?
Yeah, well, our left in America, apparently admires China, because the New York Times has now run a couple of pieces that said that their system could be superior to ours, that they may not have freedom of speech, but they have other freedoms. Okay, and it is interesting that we had a no-fly list for a time in our country for some Trump supporters, because that's what they have in China with this social credit score. If you say the wrong thing online, if your credit score goes down, and then you go to travel, even perhaps on the subway, and they can't issue a ticket, and the guy behind the counter says, "Oh, I guess you're on the list." So, and the left wants to do this in America. The mask is off. Okay, we have people in our country now that want to impose totalitarianism on Americans. And they even ran a piece the other day in the Washington Post saying maybe the elites need to choose our president from now on. So America needs a lot of prayer, and a lot of Americans are praying and on their knees, and we're hoping for God to do something.
And
we're expecting God to do something, I should say.
Amen. Amen. But if America goes down, then the entire Western world goes down. How much do you think that with China's wanting to kind of dominate the world, it wants to be the most dominant power and wants to oppress everyone else, that the West really wake up to the threat of China from the East?
I mean, how would it wake up? I think it would only wake up when China finally makes a move. And it's going to move eventually on Taiwan, and I'm afraid it's going to happen during this administration. China doesn't want a shooting war with the United States or Western powers, but if it senses our defense pact with Taiwan, we really actually don't have one. It's sort of it's an assumption, and America might not come to Taiwan's defense with this guy in the White House. I think that's the point at which the West is going to wake up. But at that point, China dominates the South Pacific, and then it starts to turn westward toward Europe.
Dale Hurd, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest on Behind the Headlines. Please keep up the excellent work that you're doing, and I very much enjoy your superb news reports.
Thank you, Simon. Great to be with you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thanks to Dale Hurd and Simon for that good and helpful interview there. We have a few more emails. Please keep emails and texts coming in. Hi, I think Biden is not going to be able to stand up to China. Very concerning. China also forces abortion. I hope that the British government will keep on their toes. Thank you for all you do. God bless Glinda. I think we're already seeing that he's not standing up to China. Calling them good folks is not exactly a display of strength or courage in reaction to the human rights abuses that are right and left. Communism is a religion, Les says. And there are leaders such as in North Korea want to be worshipped as God, and they persecute Christians so much because we confess Jesus as Lord and acknowledge him as God. Communism is much more than political. Spiritual forces are behind such regimes. One of the reasons Christians in first century were persecuted by the Roman emperor was because the Roman emperor thought they were God and felt threatened. Ask yourself, does communism and other dictatorships kill, steal, and destroy? And yes, they do. And so they're led by our enemy who comes to kill, steal, and
But I want to make an interesting point, because having, studying Revelation at the moment, my wife and myself, and describes in the book of Revelation that Satan as the dragon. And it's interesting to see that China has the dragon as their national symbol as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things we'll come to in regard to some of that Bible prophecy. There's negatives, and at the same time, there's some very interesting positives that we have to take into consideration. But one thing that is really disturbing, and we've talked a little bit about the military, 2,183 something on thousand active military personnel, 350 ships that are fully kitted out and ready for war. We've seen Captain America, we've watched Planet of the Apes, RoboCop.
And you'd like this part of the program.
Blade Runner, yeah. These sorts of programs. And what we have to bear in mind is a lot of these programs, they envision something because, while however unrealistic we might think it is to some degree, it's in the imagination, because to some degree it can be conceived of, it can be possible. I mean, the human mind is so perverse and wicked in its machinations. And so we all that to say, I mean, get ready for Captain China, because we have here, you had in that interview there with Dale, recognition that there is a legitimate attempt to create a super soldier. I was in a meeting actually a few months ago where the topic came up with a bioethicist friend of mine, and stuff regarding CRISPR and genetic mutations and various technologies involved in that. And there was this Chinese scientist who was, at least publicly, eventually declared guilty and was, I believe, imprisoned, what we're told anyway, because of some pretty disturbing toying about with genetics that were aimed at this very thing, producing a super soldier. I mean, we've talked about, and we have here just some interesting facts regarding how they're mixing pig and monkey DNA, growing human organs in animals. This is wicked. It's depraved. There's nothing normal, natural, or righteous about this at all. But the Gatestone Institute has done a very helpful article. Gordon G. Chung, author of The Coming Collapse of China, has indicated that China is indeed attempting to create a new master race. This is nothing new. Again, we were talking about Germany in the past. This is exactly along those lines. This is exactly along the lines of what Hitler was seeking to accomplish with the Third Reich. But they're believed to be creating a super soldier using CRISPR gene editing to enhance human performance, very much like what we see in granted a good positive way in Captain America. It's the stuff of Planet of the Apes, but it's actually been termed, there's this race on for
yes, it's a field and arms race.
Yeah, it's field and arms race. Go on.
No, I'll let you read out the term.
Okay.
This is the actual term. It's actually true.
Yeah. So the arms race to build a genetically modified being, a human with built-in AI technology. It's essentially along the lines of transhumanism stuff. Homo robocopus. Like this is sci-fi stuff from, you know, our TV shows and movies that we all thought, oh yeah, that was an enjoyable film, that was great. This is becoming reality, though.
Yeah, because they want to become the world's most powerful army, and they believe that using genetics and human performance, that they can create these superhuman beings. Now, you know, it does sound very familiar to anyone who knows the Bible and know about the Nephilim, because it sounds very, very similar. That you create these super powerful soldiers that are genetically modified, so they got stronger bones, they got a bigger heart, they can run faster, they're stronger, but also connected with AI technology as well. And then they become the ultimate fighting machine. So the French now are developing this. I don't know about the British, according to news reports, but the Americans certainly are. And the other thing is what they're doing as well, and you mentioned a little bit of this earlier, I'm going to mention this. So Bing Su, a Chinese geneticist, runs the state-run that's Kunming Institute of Zoology, recently inserted the human MCPH1 gene, for all you scientists out there, that develops the brain of that, a human brain and human thinking into a monkey. And there's another one called FOXPZ gene that's associated with language skills. So they're actually trying to make super intelligent apes. And if anyone has watched Planet of the Apes, that's something to be very concerned about. So, and also what is allowing this to happen is the fact that our scientists in the West have no moral code whatsoever. We have some standards in place where we will not do certain things in terms of ethics, but the Chinese have no ethics. They will stoop this low in order to experiment on pigs, on monkeys, even on humans as well, to create these super soldiers and also super intelligent apes. And that's why many American scientists are working with Chinese scientists, and this is where they're getting their technical knowledge and know-how. So is it no wonder we had something like COVID-19 come out of China, considering what they're doing? And they are playing God. They are changing genetics and DNA. of creatures, but the fact is growing human organs in animals is disgusting, absolutely immoral, and yet the Chinese are doing this.
And they're doing it with our help. So this is a big part of the problem. You know, we look at China and we say, oh, look, they're the threat, they're the threat, they're a great threat. Let's look at ourselves. Let's look at all of the evil that we've been enacting and enabling. Let's look at the fact that we can gloss over the rampant and obvious human rights abuses and say, no, they're good folks. We still have some emails coming through. Keep them coming, guys. Barnabas says facial recognition is in the Christian churches. So if there's a new face in church, the police come to question the person. I've come across this.
Must be in China, isn't it?
Yeah, in China, yeah. They also listen into what the preacher says. Also, 5 Christians were prosecuted for selling audio versions of the Bible. That's from Gordon. Thank you for that, Gordon. Tim asks, what's the difference between Facebook and TikTok regarding data mining? Facebook links to Google and Amazon for marketing and location information and personal data. What makes TikTok worse? Well, it's a fair question, Tim. I was talking a little bit about this. I think we've both talked about it as well. There are legitimate concerns that we have to consider when it comes to social media use in general, and we have to be aware of what's going on when it comes to Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, whatnot. The Social Network is a decent documentary. Not The Social Network, The Social Dilemma is a decent documentary which talks a little bit about some of that. TikTok is similar. The difference is that it's masquerading as a
fun
network.
App. It's a fun app. It's a very popular app.
Yeah.
I think, in reference to what Dale Hurd said, he said it acts as a mining app. So in other words, anything you've got on your phone, all your contacts, all your photographs, all your bank details, every bit of your health information, your insurance information, your passwords on your phone, they will gather all of this information. And the difference between Facebook is they will actually store maybe comments that you made or posts that you've made on Facebook and likes that you've done, but they won't necessarily store every information that is actually on your phone. And that's the difference. Using their big spy network, apparently they're spying on millions of Americans. So how many of us here in Britain are also being spied on by the Chinese government? That's a big question. I suppose the other thing we have to develop this one as well, particularly what our viewers said, that according to Release International, more than 500 million surveillance cameras and state-of-the-art face recognition systems have been put in place. The regime cynically uses this technology to watch every street corner, church, and even pulpits. And what we're seeing now is a huge increase in persecution against Christians. And of course, there's the minority Muslim group in China, the Uyghurs are actually being put in concentration camps.
And many of them are actually Christians as well, the Uyghurs. They're culturally Muslim in their background, but I've seen some figures that show quite a few are Christians also, horrific treatment. But on that, the control is seen, even if you consider the lack of willingness of people to condemn. And when this is highlighted, I think, we're Arsenal fans, and Mesut Ozil was saying, look, there needs to be something said about the Uyghurs. Now, whatever one thinks about the place of football getting into politics or not, it was interesting that the football club was willing to make particular political stances for the rights of others. But when it came to the Uyghurs, there was not just silence, there was an actual refusal to say anything. I believe they may have said something, certainly Ozil said something, and then suddenly you have China making threats. That goes back to some of the corruption where you have pressure, not
financial
only
pressure.
Financial pressure. If you look even in political realms, the corruption is there, where there was something in our show prep regarding factories that are run, that are Chinese run and operated in the U.S., that there will be a threat to close those factories that employ
absolutely
so many
willing
people.
to do that. We're down to the last few minutes and really want to add China's place in Bible prophecy. China is mentioned in the book of Revelation as kings of the East. And in Revelation 16, verses 12 to 16, it says, "Then the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, which is in Iraq, and its waters dried up, so the way of the kings from the east may be prepared." And also you've got the number of this armed forces that represent the kings in the east crossing over the river Euphrates. Is it 200 million soldiers?
Yeah, so there's 2 million. There's just 2,183,000 soldiers, but there's enough of a population in China to see them very likely play a role in that. On a positive note, at the same time in Bible prophecy, if we go all the way back to Isaiah, if we go to Isaiah 46, we see there's a people mentioned, the people of Sinim, S-I-N-I-M. And if you break down the etymology and you go back to some of the ancient sources and look at it, it's highly likely that the people which Isaiah 46 mentions are the Chinese, and these are included in a number of people who are believers, and that's what Isaiah 46 is, rather 49 is speaking of a gathering of God's people, including these people of Sinim, and including these people of China. So yes, we have this great army. Yes, we have this role that China likely plays. China has always been a critical part of human history. Look at the massive advancements they've had. Look at the atrocities that have been committed out of the various regimes and dictatorships and monarchies over the years. But at the end of it, there are over 200 million believers in China.
Incredible, isn't it?
Amazing. And these people will join us together regardless of whatever persecution they or we go through now, in the past, now and in the future, at the feet of our Lord, dwelling in peace, where there's no more fear of corruption, no more fear of unrighteousness, no more fear of injustice. It's a beautiful picture.
Absolutely. And also, I think, Christians living in the West, we need to really pray and support the underground church in China. It may not be on our radar screen because it's in the Far East, but in the growing months and years, we're going to know more about the threat that China poses.
And as we continue to consider how we pray for Chinese believers, let's be aware. Let's keep our eyes open. Let's continue to have that awareness of what's going on in our society, some of the manipulations that are undergoing. Can we halt it? Well, no. And to some degree, we can resist. And as Christians, I think there's a degree where we should be dissidents against acts of injustice. We should speak up for those who are facing these atrocities. But ultimately, be aware that God is sovereign. He is powerful. And one day, the evil that is coming from China, that's coming from the US, that's coming from the UK, wherever it is, these will stand before God in judgment.
Amen. So I want to thank you for watching tonight's program as we've discussed the threat posed to China, not only to the United States, but to the world. And I think all of us need to wake up to this real danger posed by the Communist Party of China and its desire for global dominance that will be the biggest threat the West has faced since the Second World War. So let's pray, let's stay alert, let's read our Bibles, and let's be battle ready. So thank you for watching Behind the Headlines.